It's a cold December evening in 1956, and two young sisters are getting ready to see their idol on the big screen. Barbara, 15 years old, and Patricia, just 12, are about to walk out the door of their modest Chicago home, their eyes bright with excitement. They're going to see Elvis Presley in Love Me Tender at the Brighton Theater. And for them, this isn't just another movie night. This is everything. They had already seen the film multiple times before, captivated by the king of rock and roll, and tonight would be no different, or so they thought. What happened after they left that theater would become one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries in Chicago's history. A case so disturbing that it would change an entire city forever and leave detectives chasing shadows for nearly 70 years. The Grimes sisters weren't troublemakers. They were good students, well-behaved, and deeply loved by their family. Barbara attended Thomas Kelly High School, while Patricia was enrolled at St. Maurice School. They came from a working-class family in the MC Kinley Park neighborhood, one of 7 children born to Joseph and Loretta Grimes. Their parents were hardworking people who instilled values of responsibility and trust in their children. On that fateful evening of December 28th, the girls asked for permission to see the Elvis movie one more time. Their mother agreed, though she expected them home by a reasonable hour. The Brighton Theater was just a short trip away in the Brighton Park area, a place the girls knew well. It was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be routine. But as the hours ticked by and the night grew darker, the Grimes family began to worry. Midnight came and went, then 1 in the morning, then 2. The girls had never stayed out this late before. Something was terribly wrong. Their mother, frantic with worry, contacted the police. At first, the response was frustratingly dismissive. Some investigators theorized that the girls had simply run away, perhaps to chase some teenage fantasy or meet up with boyfriends. Others suggested they might be staying with friends, caught up in the excitement of youth and rebellion. But anyone who truly knew Barbara and Patricia understood that this theory made no sense. These were not girls who defied their parents or disappeared without a word. These were responsible young women who always came home. As the days turned into a week, the case began to gain traction. The media picked up the story, and suddenly, the disappearance of the Grimes sisters was front-page news across Chicago and beyond. The police launched what would become one of the largest missing persons investigations in the city's history. Volunteers combed through neighborhoods, parks, and alleyways. Flyers with the girls' photographs were plastered on every available surface. Radio stations broadcast appeals, begging the sisters to come home, pleading with anyone who had seen them to contact authorities. Elvis Presley himself even made a public statement, asking the girls to return safely. The entire city held its breath, hoping for a miracle. But hope is a fragile thing, and in this case, it was about to be shattered. On January 22, 1957, nearly a month after the girls vanished, a construction worker named Leonard Prescott was driving along a desolate stretch of German Church Road in Willow Springs, a rural area southwest of Chicago. The landscape was bleak, covered in snow and ice, the kind of place where silence feels heavy and oppressive. As Prescott's eyes scanned the roadside, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. 2 naked bodies, frozen and partially covered in snow, lay discarded like refuse on the side of the road. He immediately contacted the police, and within hours, the worst fears of the Grimes family were confirmed. The bodies were identified as Barbara and Patricia Grimes. The condition of the bodies raised more questions than answers. The girls were found nude, their clothing nowhere to be seen. Their bodies appeared to have been washed, as if someone had taken great care to remove evidence. There were no obvious signs of extreme violence, no gunshot wounds, no stab marks. The autopsy would later reveal that the girls had most likely died within hours of their disappearance, meaning they had been missing for weeks, yet their bodies suggested they had only recently been placed at the location where they were found. This inconsistency baffled investigators. Where had the girls been during that time? Why were their bodies so well preserved despite the harsh winter conditions? And perhaps most disturbingly, who would do something so calculated and cruel? Medical examiner's report added to the confusion. The official cause of death was listed as exposure to the elements, but this explanation felt inadequate. How could two healthy young girls simply freeze to death within hours of leaving a movie theater? Toxicology reports showed no alcohol or drugs in their systems, ruling out the theory that they had been intoxicated or voluntarily engaging in risky behavior. One of the girls showed evidence of sexual relations, though the degraded state of the bodies made it difficult to determine exact details. The lack of clear physical trauma suggested that the killer or killers had been meticulous, perhaps experienced. This was not a crime of passion or impulse. This was something darker, more sinister. The investigation that followed was a circus of confusion, false leads, and public hysteria. Dozens of suspects were questioned, including known sex offenders, drifters, and anyone who had been spotted near the Brighton Theater that night. One suspect, a drifter named Benny Bedwell, confessed to the murders after hours of intense interrogation. He provided details that seemed to match the crime, and for a brief moment, it appeared the case was solved. But as investigators dug deeper, Bedwell's confession began to fall apart. Key details didn't match the evidence, and it became clear that he had been coerced into a false admission. Desperate to end the relentless questioning, he was eventually released, and the case remained open. Over the years, multiple theories emerged, each more unsettling than the last. Some believed the girls had been picked up by someone they knew, someone they trusted, only to be betrayed in the most horrific way. Others suggested they had encountered a stranger, a predator who seized an opportunity when the girls missed their bus or accepted a ride. There were whispers of organized crime involvement, rumors of a sex trafficking ring operating in Chicago at the time. One particularly disturbing theory pointed to Charles Melquist, a confessed child predator who had a history of violent crimes against young girls. Former Chicago police investigator Raymond Johnson became convinced that Melquist was responsible, but Melquist died before he could ever be charged, taking whatever secrets he held to the grave. The Grimes case also became entangled in the controversies and failures of the investigation itself. The Cook County coroner, Walter M.C. Caron, clashed publicly with the lead investigator, Captain Harry G. Elvis, over the cause of death and the handling of evidence. G. Elvis insisted that the girls had been murdered shortly after their disappearance and criticized the initial slow response by authorities. M.C. Caron, on the other hand, stood by the exposure theory and accused G. Elvis of sensationalizing the case. The infighting became so intense that G. Elvis was eventually fired in February 1957 for refusing to retract his statements. The public spectacle damaged the credibility of the investigation and raised doubts about whether justice would ever be served. What makes the Grimes case so haunting is not just the brutality of the crime, but the way it exposed the vulnerability of ordinary life. These were not girls who lived on the margins of society. They were not involved in anything dangerous or illicit. They were simply two sisters who loved Elvis Presley and wanted to see his movie one more time. Their deaths shattered the illusion of safety that many Americans clung to in the post-war era. The 1950s are often romanticized as a time of innocence, prosperity, and family values, but beneath that polished surface lurked the same darkness that exists in every era. The Grimes sisters became a symbol of that hidden danger, a reminder that evil doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the guise of normalcy. For the people of Chicago, the case became a collective trauma. Parents tightened their grip on their children, no longer allowing them the freedom to roam neighborhoods or take public transportation alone. The sense of community trust that had once defined urban life began to erode, replaced by suspicion and fear. The Grimes family, meanwhile, was left to navigate an unimaginable grief. Their loss was made even more painful by the fact that the killer was never caught, that justice remained elusive. Loretta Grimes, the girl's mother, spent the rest of her life haunted by unanswered questions, tormented by the what-ifs and the could-have-beens. She died in 1989, never knowing the truth of what happened to her daughters. Decades have passed, and still, the case remains unsolved. The Cook County Sheriff's Office continues to keep the file open, and detectives occasionally revisit the evidence, hoping that advances in forensic technology might finally crack the mystery. In recent years, DNA analysis has become a powerful tool in solving cold cases, offering hope where none existed before. But as Detective Jason Moran of the Sheriff's Office has acknowledged, Time can be both an ally and an enemy. Witnesses have died, memories have faded, and physical evidence has degraded. The likelihood of solving the case diminishes with each passing year, but the determination to find answers persists. There's something deeply human about our need for closure, our desperate desire to make sense of senseless tragedy. We want to believe that every mystery can be solved, that every villain can be unmasked, that justice will eventually prevail. But the reality is far messier. Some questions may never be answered. Some crimes may never be solved. The Grimes sisters' case forces us to confront that uncomfortable truth, to accept that even in a world of forensic science and investigative brilliance, there are shadows that remain impenetrable. Yet, even in the absence of resolution, there is meaning to be found. The story of Barbara and Patricia Grimes is not just about a crime. It's about resilience, about a community that refused to forget, about a family that carried their grief with dignity. It's about the detectives who, nearly 70 years later, still review the files, still hold out hope, still believe that someday the pieces will fall into place. It's about the reminder that every unsolved case represents a person, a life, a story that deserves to be remembered. As we look back on that cold December night in 1956, we are reminded of how fragile life can be, how quickly joy can turn to horror, how a simple decision to see a movie can lead to unfathomable tragedy. We're reminded that behind every headline, every case number, every cold file sitting in an evidence room, there are real people whose lives were cut short, whose families were shattered, whose stories demand to be told. Barbara and Patricia Grimes were more than victims. They were daughters, sisters, students, dreamers. They loved Elvis. They loved life. And they deserved so much more than the fate that befell them. The case still haunts Chicago because it represents something larger than itself. It's a wound that never fully healed, a question that echoes through time. Who killed the Grimes sisters? Where were they during those missing weeks? What horrors did they endure in their final hours? These questions linger in the air like ghosts, demanding attention, refusing to be silenced. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the refusal to forget is the only justice we can offer when all other avenues have been exhausted. Perhaps by telling their story, by keeping their memory alive, we honor Barbara and Patricia in a way that transcends the courtroom and the verdict. In the end, the Grimes sisters' case is a testament to the enduring power of mystery, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the profound impact that a single tragedy can have on an entire city. Nearly 70 years have passed, but the echoes of that December night still reverberate through the streets of Chicago, a haunting reminder that some stories are never truly over, and some mysteries may never be solved. But as long as there are detectives willing to dig through old files, as long as there are families who refuse to give up hope, and as long as there are people willing to listen and remember, the story of Barbara and Patricia Grimes will continue to matter. And maybe, just maybe, one day the truth will finally come to light.